You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're, as usual, the host. We're the host. We are the host for this show. Wow, it's like right out the gate, man. I can't talk. Apparently, it's attack of the vocabulary because, I don't know. But yes, we're back. We're here to actually go in depth on the second of the prequel movies, Attack of the Clones. Now, this is one that you and I basically have said they really should have just started the series with this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or maybe, I don't know, maybe do like a little bit of a prequel or something like that. But I always thought that like this should have been episode 1. Then maybe they do stuff that would probably end up in the Clone Wars for episode 2, and then of course Revenge of the Sith. So I mean, do you still agree with that, or have you changed your mind?
I mean, I think I still agree with it, but I also feel like there's some things in the Phantom Menace that were pivotal, that probably needed to be, like the whole Qui-Gon Obi-Wan relationship.
Well, not only that, but I remember one of the comments that I made during our Phantom Menace analysis, which, by the way, if you guys missed that, it's on the channel. After you're done watching this, go back and look. But I remember talking specifically about the duel that really it's the most important duel of the entire franchise, because that really was where the fate of the galaxy rested, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was really the war for Anakin's soul. Is he going to be trained by Obi-Wan? Is he going to be trained by Qui-Gon? So yeah, right. Absolutely. So yeah, we're basically getting ready to dive deeply into Attack of the Clones. This movie came out in 2002, May of 2002. So This is back when George Lucas was in charge. These things came out every 3 years. So
I mean, was just turning 18.
Oh man,
I know.
Yeah, you were, weren't you?
Mm-hmm. Man, what a time.
Yeah, that's just I don't even want to think about that. That's just pretty crazy to me. I see that even though this thing came back, our graphics are actually wrong again. Man, this does this all the time. Well, while I'm working on fixing that, basically, I think that one of the cool things about Attack of the Clones was we saw a little bit more about Anakin's growth, because he actually aged like 10 years in between episode 1 and episode 2. So I honestly think that this is really, to me, where he got truly interesting.
Yeah, I mean, as a character, the development, this is, you see the most, I can't even say the most growth, because, when we get to Revenge of the Sith, I mean, there is a lot of growth that took place in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
However, though, there's a huge jump, this is very reminiscent of, since we were just talking about me being in high school, or turning 18 when this movie was released, it's kind of like that thing where, you don't see a kid for a while or something like that, and then all of a sudden, like, you don't realize 10 years has gone by, and it's like, man, like, this person is sprouted, like, they're 5 or 6 inches taller than the last time you saw them. They may have facial hair, their characteristics are different, and this is what we get from Anakin and Obi-Wan, really, because, Obi-Wan is sporting a longer hair. He's got a little gruff on his face. When we last saw him in Phantom Menace, he was barefaced, kind of clean. He was still in Padawan mode. But now at this point, Obi-Wan is a actual Jedi Knight at this point. And he's, training Anakin, who's now more mature in some areas, but still very immature in a lot.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I always thought was really, really interesting about just Anakin's character was the fact that, and, obviously we'll get pretty deep into this, but one of the things that I think is really the most important to point out is that he has learned a lot as far as the Jedi way goes, right? But
Mm-hmm.
there's still that anger, and you can see that actually bubbling up in him as time, moves on, right? I mean, there's little scenes, and like I said, we'll get actually really in depth into this, but there's a lot of scenes where you can tell that dark side nature of his is starting to rise to the surface. It's just at this point, he's still actually trying to fight that, which I thought was, a pretty cool thing, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, um, watching Anakin try to navigate, this era of his life is very complex because he's, in that puberty stage, definitely, right? He likes girls. He's grown. He's a little bit more moody, more emotional. He doesn't have complete control over himself, as far as that is concerned. Um, and this is the first time we've ever really seen. Well, I won't say, because I think when we see Obi-Wan in the Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan is probably 18 or 19, somewhere around there, maybe even 20
Yeah,
years old around that time.
it's definitely something like that. He's
But
somewhere in there.
in this, we're catching Anakin. He seems to be roughly maybe 16, 17 years old. That's what it. At least if he's not, that's his attitude. He's conducting himself like a 16 or 17-year-old, not quite a more mature 2021. And you can see by his he's trying to assert himself at times where it's inappropriate, or he's not taking all things into consideration because he knows he's gifted. He knows he has skill. And when you start to learn, like, oh, okay, I can do this, I can do that. Now you all of a sudden think you're some virtuoso in whatever it is that you're doing. And it's just like, no, you're not. You're not as good as you think you are. I mean, don't get me wrong, Anakin was talented, and we see that throughout the movies with his ability in the Force, with his capabilities with the lightsaber and those, but it's the judgment, it's the being able to properly lead, is where Anakin tends to struggle because he's so high strung on emotion, and unfortunately it led him into places that were quite dark.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's one of the things that I think really honestly it's really the downside of the whole thing, I mean, I guess the best way to put it really is just that he's powerful and he understands that he's powerful, but he's not quite able to control that yet. And I think that
Mhm.
honestly, that's really where he's running into a lot of the problems is that he just, he's not really sure, um, what he needs to do in order to, because like on one hand, he wants to please Obi-Wan. You could tell that friendship is real.
Mhm.
You could tell that he's really trying to do the right thing. He's trying to, um, maneuver things, I guess, like the way that he should, like the way a Jedi should go. But unfortunately, what's happening, I think, is the fact that while he's actually, trying to do this, and he's, I think he is actually legitimately, like at this point, he feels more Jedi than what we eventually see him become, right? Like
Mhm.
at first, like by Revenge of the Sith, you could tell that okay, he's starting to maybe not feel so Jedi-ish, you know what I mean? But I mean at this point in time though, I think he's still trying to be that good Jedi. He's still trying to be, trying to please his master, trying to do all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's the hard part for Anakin at this juncture is that he feels held back, in a lot of ways, and it's just kind of like, okay, he feels like he's ready to do this. He feels like he's ready to be able to do that, and it's like, no, everybody keeps telling him no, but he kind of knows that he's the chosen one. He knows that he's powerful. He knows these things, and that's very hard for someone to handle when you know
Exactly.
what you can do, and then yet everyone else above you is telling you no, not yet. Wait your turn. It'll come. Be patient. A lot of people have problems with that type of submission when they feel like, okay, or they know that they have abilities that's probably like, he knows ability wise, he probably can kick the crap out of all the other Padawans and
Well, that's
everybody
it.
else around. So it's kind of
That's
like, what are you holding me back for? Like,
right.
and but he doesn't understand it's more to it than that, and that's the lesson, that's one of the bits that runs through this movie is, for kids to take away from it, since Star Wars is for kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that kids need to take away from it, is like, you may have great ability, but that doesn't mean that you're ready to take on the responsibility of everything. And it's kind of like that whole Spider-Man thing, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that type of mentality. He needs like a Uncle Ben to kind of tell him that, basically.
Yeah. So I mean, now that I don't know, my computer is actually back to normal, and I've been able to put the correct graphics back in. Uh, we can actually roll this thing. So the first
All right.
thing, of course, that we see is the assassination attempt. Now, this I thought was really cool because it was like a super dark way of
To open up.
to open this thing. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
this is not, because when we last left the Phantom Menace, it was like this all cuddly kumbaya moment, where everybody's just, happy or whatever. And it's like, nope. So I thought that
Yeah.
this was actually a really cool thing.
Yeah, I love the out the gate they hit us with the shell game thing too. Where we thought that was Padme and it really wasn't.
Right. Right. Yeah, we thought it was Padme and it wasn't. And this was actually, I think, where we sort of clued in on the fact that they had the whole like decoy thing. I mean, we saw that a little bit, in Phantom Menace, but I think that here it was quite a bit more obvious. And then of course, now we move along, we see that Palpatine, I mean, I just love the shot of Palpatine with the Jedi. I mean, I remember when I first saw this, it just kind of blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
That here's the Sith Lord, the guy is right there. All the Jedi are there. None of them can sense the dark side in them. And yet, he's just, I mean, I always thought that was cool because, again, he's playing kind of like that fatherly, kindly old man type of thing, very, and it's so duplicitous and he's just so good at it. And again, this really falls into why Palpatine is Palpatine.
Oh yeah, it's very kind of like as a fan watching it, you see that you create your own tension in your head because it's like, yo, you're in there with Yoda, Mace, like you're like looking at the shot, you're looking at probably a good half of the council, and they're the most powerful ones. You got Mundi, you got Plo Koon, you got Kit Fisto, you got Mace, Yoda. I can't remember which one that one is, but uh, Master Yundula, I think that's her name. So like you got like these powerful, these super powerful. I mean, like Mace and Yoda alone, right?
Yeah,
Let's just take those two, and they can't sense him.
exactly. They don't
That's
sense him, and that's the thing that
but
I
that's
think
odd for them, though.
it is. And I mean, it's not until later on that Yoda starts to clue in on the fact that, maybe the dark side's clouding us or whatever. Actually, I think that comes later in this film. But, there's all these things that they're blind to and they can't see. And that's one of the things that I loved about the whole Tales of the Jedi animated series that we just reviewed not too long ago, is the fact that you're getting a little bit of that episode 1.5, right? They were showing you some of the things that took place before this film, and it really enriches and it enhances, and, it just does a really good job, I think. And then, of course, he's basically initiating this plan. I mean, if you really stop and think about what he's done, right? He essentially orchestrated this assassination attempt on Padme. Now, of course, in a perfect world, he would have liked it if it had actually worked, because I think that he's trying to obviously do a false flag thing, right? Because he has the separatists going that are led by Count Dooku, which, we later see. But it's kind of like he's playing both sides. So he's orchestrating this enemy so that way he could take on these emergency powers. He can, which of course happens in the next film, but he's cementing himself more and more about being like kind of a wartime leader, and he could take more things. And then of course he can use the excuse to create an army, and which will make it easier for him to take over. And the Jedi are playing right into his hands when they do this. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, you summed it up perfectly. Just it once again just shows you the genius and the mastermind that Palpatine is. Just to kind of, and the fact that this one plan, like, okay, the plan to kill Amidala didn't work. He has contingencies. Like, he's not freaked out about it. He's planned for the stuff like this. Like, okay, if this doesn't work, I'll probably get her another way, which she does set up. And then, even if that doesn't work, he still has another plan for that. And it's like, okay, well, that didn't work. Okay, fine. I'll just take the loop this way. And, like David usually says, this is why Palpatine is the GOAT.
Well, I don't know if David's with us, but Ronaldo is with us. He says, hello, my fellow Twi'leks, which is, always fun. So, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, and here's the thing that I think is kind of fun about this whole, is when Palpatine goes, well, I know, you could send Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? I mean, instantly you knew when he said that he is trying to get Obi-Wan out of the way because he's the one that can influence Anakin. He's like the other influence, and he's trying to get Anakin to himself. And so he's trying to get Obi-Wan out of the way and preferably killed, because that's the whole thing. It's like, okay, well, if I have him going to protect her, it makes me look cool. But then whoever's trying to kill Padme, hey, maybe you can off Obi-Wan and then all of our problems are solved. But of course, they dispatch Anakin to go with them. Now, this part, I don't know if Palpatine was orchestrating or not, because you can look at this one of two ways. You can look at this as, either Palpatine is trying to make Anakin more Sith-like by getting more attached. He knows that he's just hardcore into Padme, and that's all that he's dreamed about, basically, since they left. And this could be Palpatine trying to facilitate that, I guess. Because otherwise, it would sort of interrupt the plan, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Palpatine, he's probably looking at the situation where, one, he wants to get, Anakin isolated. He wants to get him away from Obi-Wan as much as possible. And what better way if Obi-Wan is dead, right? So you kind of get him out of the way there. And then he doesn't have, so Obi-Wan won't have such an influence on him. And plus, he also would know that would probably also anger Anakin. That would probably create some more anger, some more fear, all things that he could use to sway Anakin to the dark side.
Well, and it does, because, I mean, if you think about it, this is where, right when he meets her again, of course, he's just like completely, smitten with her again. Yeah. But one of the things is that and this is a common theme that happens throughout, is that he's constantly dismissed. You know, I mean, Obi-Wan totally puts him in his place when Anakin starts to, you know, smell himself a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and then, of course, Padme later, which, you know, we'll get into that. But, I mean, she even is just dismissive. He's just a Padawan. You know, it's like, I mean, everybody is essentially underestimating. It's like he brought up earlier. You can't help but think that Anakin in his head is going, you know what? I'm the chosen one. I mean, I'm better than all you guys. You know, it's, I mean, why are you who are, I mean, I'm going to be way more powerful than you someday. And of course, you got Palpatine that's constantly saying that. You know, ooh, I see you're going to be the greatest of all the Jedi. And he's, you know, he's trying to reinforce that pride thing in him.
That pride, that arrogance, that, you know, and on top of that, you know, he's also trying to sow seeds of jealousy.
Right.
Like, oh, you know, Obi-Wan is jealous of you. The Jedi are jealous because you're going to outshine them, and they're trying to hold you back because they know that, you know, you have the potential to be twice the Jedi that they are. So
exactly. Yeah. Well, then, of course, we get to these mysterious assassins. Of course, we later learn this is Jango Fett and Zam Wesell, but, you know, this was, I remember when I first saw this. And again, one of the things that was really cool about Attack of the Clones to me is that even though there's some problems, and, you know, we'll get into those as well, but this movie moved a lot faster than The Phantom Menace did. I mean, wasn't quite Rise of Skywalker pacing, but, you know, I thought it really was moving at a good clip. You know, I mean, it started out with the whole action of the assassination attempt of Padme. You know, it goes in. Sure, it gets a little talky with the Jedi and everything, but that's, you want to see that. You know, you got Palpatine, you got the Jedi, they're interacting. You know that the Sith Lord's right there and they don't know, and so there adds a little bit of a dimension of excitement. And then you have this scene, which, you know, I mean, as we move on through this, you guys will see. I mean, if you guys have seen the movie, and being that it came out in 2002, I'm sure most of you watching this have. But for those who haven't,
some even watched it this weekend, you know, in preparation for this. You never know.
Sure. I know I watched it last weekend. Because, you know, it's funny. There's certain elements that, I mean, even though, look, I mean, the fact is, all the films, you and I could probably spew scene after scene after scene. But there's always something that you miss, and there's like little details that you pick up on as you watch them over and over again, which, you know, I think is kind of cool. But I mean, these two, they were interesting. You know, they were really interesting characters to me. And I think that that's something that was missing to a certain degree in the sequel trilogy, where with the prequels, you know, in Phantom Menace, you had somebody like Watto. You had, I mean, Jar Jar, while we hated him, he was an interesting guy. You know, it's Ronaldo says, I mean, when you compare this one, it feels more like a video game, which I think is fun. And that's honestly a good way of looking at it, honestly.
That's a good point. Yeah,
you know,
I never thought about that.
Yeah,
that's true.
And it does, and it has that pacing. And even then, I think that unlike, and I'm going to compare it to The Rise of Skywalker, because that's the other movie that had really breakneck pacing. Revenge of the Sith, which of course we'll get to next week, that one has a lot of stop and start, which I think is cool, because there's just a lot of meat in that film that you have to express. This one, yeah, I would agree with Ronaldo. It's kind of like a fun adventure film. And of course, in the spirit of that, you had the second attempt on Padme's life, right? Where you have these like really weird bug things, and they always do this. They always put the really strange little bugs, like Star Trek did it with Star Trek 2, where they had those weird little things that crawled into the ears of Chekhov and his captain. And then you had these things, which of course, I mean, they were vanquished instantly. But what I really liked was juxtaposed with this whole scene it was creepy, right? You had the cutting of the, or I don't even know if it was cutting of glass. It was almost like a interruption of the force field or something. Drops the things in. R2-D2 in the dark room. It's kind of looking around. You know, the way the music and all that, the way they handled that, I thought was kind of creepy. It gave you a sense of dread. And then they juxtapose that where Obi-Wan and Anakin, you're starting to see a little bit of the differences of their philosophies. Where obviously Anakin is, you know, he really believes that Palpatine is a good guy, really trying to fight for the good of the galaxy. Obi-Wan is like, you know what? He's a politician. He can't really trust any of them. And so you have this really cool tug-of-war thing going on, you know? And, I mean, it's juxtaposed, of course, with this little action scene that turns even more action.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, you have this whole thing of Obi-Wan trying to explain things to Anakin, Anakin kind of rebelling against because of his feelings for her, you know, and, you know, he's even letting a little bit of that slide to Obi-Wan because he's like, look, man, you know, kind of got a thing for her. And
Yeah,
Obi-Wan's
exactly.
like, hey, man, look, listen, I get it, but she's a politician, man, you know.
Yep.
You can't trust him. And he's like, well, no, she's different, you know, and that trying to rationalize things. And yeah, like you got this whole thing where, you know, you got these little creatures in there trying to, obviously they're poisonous. And it's a more of a subtle approach of trying to, you know, vanquish someone, which I'm surprised Django didn't do himself. I'm surprised he hired Zam to do it.
Yeah, I actually don't know what the deal was with that. I actually thought the same thing even when I first saw it. You know, it seems like this isn't, especially after the failure of the first attempt, you would think that now you'd be like, hey, you know, maybe I better make sure this actually happens. You know, because, and I agree, that was one of the first things that I thought too. Ronaldo says, those bugs creep me out. Imagine one of those on your back. No, thank you.
Yeah, they remind me like leeches or something.
They
like,
do. Well,
like
they're kind of like, yeah, like this,
leech.
right? Like a caterpillar leech kind of thing. And it's funny because you're watching those things, you know, about to crawl on or whatever, and you got to wonder. I think you're right. They're probably poisonous. They bite, but either way, man, they creep me out big time. And so, of course, you know, there's a lot of different things, right? I mean, Obi-Wan just like bursts out of the thing, goes in, and they do this whole speeder chase. And one of the things that I thought, again, in the middle of all the action, you have this dialogue. Now, of course, it wasn't the greatest dialogue in the world because George Lucas, but at least it did give you another little sense of their friendship. Because again, one of the things that I think that they needed to do in the prequels, and I wish they had done more of it, was give us more of the sense of friendship, like what we ended up getting in the actual Clone Wars animated series.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and this, you know, this whole speeder chase, you know, it was kind of fun because once again, it gives you information that you need to understand. So, like, Obi-Wan jumps out after this thing. He's flying through the city of Coruscant. Anakin's looking for a speeder, but it does show that he's thinking. He's like, okay, you know, he had to find one without a top to it because, you know, so Obi-Wan can drop into it safely, you know. But the back and forth, even in the midst of danger, you know, they're still cracking jokes, you know, with each other, like, you know, being kind of snippy and sarcastic with each other, like, oh, you know, what took you so long? He's like, well, master, I had to find a speeder that, you know, had the right blah, blah, blah. And, you know,
right. There's a lot of lighthearted moments in there. And it's also one of those, like, you get the sense that they've been through this stuff before, you know, like this is just, you know, I mean, for us, it's like this, whoa, look at this, like, crazy adventure. To them, it's like Thursday, you know, I mean, it's
exactly,
you know, it's just another day, another Jedi mission. Ronaldo was saying, I wonder why Django didn't use bombs instead of bugs. And of course, the idea is you still got to be stealthy, right?
Well, I think that's after being attacked the first time, because they tried to blow her up the first time. And I think they probably put it in an area where at least it was a little bit more secure from those type of ornaments. So um, now at this point, you kind of have to be a little bit more covert because now, of course, if you try to attack one, they got that place guarded left and right, and there's probably
Mm-hmm.
people all over the place. But now you got to be a little bit more, covert with it.
Absolutely. He goes on to say, probably talking about the dialogue too. Yeah, it wasn't great at all, but it's fun. And really, that's the way that I would describe this movie overall. I mean, it was fun, and it definitely had a lot of moments. Again, it was night and day from Phantom Menace, even though there are some that do argue that Phantom Menace is actually the better film, and I could definitely see that. But I still think that I like Attack of the Clones a little bit better. All right, so now, obviously, we get to another key scene where we're going to take a look at the approaches that both of these guys have. So first we have Obi-Wan's approach. So obviously, they crash. Zam Wessel is basically flees into this space bar or whatever. And Obi-Wan and Anakin are going to go after her. But what's cool is Obi-Wan basically just takes this very relaxed, I'm going to let her come to me approach, which I thought was really cool, and then of course you get the funny scene with the death sticks thing. And again, I think that another key scene for this is that it shows that Obi-Wan has a very sharp, kind of dry sense of humor. He's not all serious all the time. He does have that sense of humor that comes out, which we see more in 3, but we started to see it a little bit in 2.
Yeah, Obi-Wan definitely kind of has that cool hand Luke, approach. He's
Yes.
like, even just looking at this still of him, right? He's just like, yo, chill. Even though he's using the Force at this moment, which is so funny because the Force works on the weak-minded, and because this guy's high off death sticks, basically he's offering some drugs, and Obi-Wan's like, no, you don't want to do this. You want to go home and rethink your life, like. Even in the midst, I have a whole nother mission that's way more important. I'm going to take the time to make sure this guy gets back on the straight and narrow. Man, and it's funny, but it's kind of cool of him. But that's Obi-Wan though. That's his...
totally Obi-Wan, exactly. But see, by the same token, though, Anakin, on the other hand, Anakin's a little bit more serious. He's really trying to take that, and this is the thing again. It's that. The Jedi way is patience. How many times has Obi-Wan said to him, patience, Anakin, patience. Just be patient. Anakin's all about acting now. The immediacy
Very
of it.
impulsive.
Very impulsive. I am going to take the initiative. I'm going to take action. I'm going to find her. Obi-Wan, being the more experienced Jedi, knows that I'm a target now, so if I just stand out here in the open, the killer's going to come to me, or assassin, I should say. And, what does he do? He, whips around really fast with his lightsaber, which I thought was just incredible. I mean, it was just one of those things that's really, really wild. Now, this is funny because, again, we often talk about the stuff that happens in the background. Ronaldo says, taking away those robots playing football on TV, the spacebar looks very cool. It's very cyberpunk. And I agree. I think that that's one of the other things that Attack of the Clones gave us, where we see Coruscant. We see a little bit more of that seedy side, the underbelly of it, right? And I thought that was kind of cool, too, because this is really the first time. I mean, we saw it a little bit in The Phantom Menace, but we're really starting to get a feel for what Coruscant is like, which I thought was kind of cool. All right.
Yeah.
So now we have, of course, they're about to question Zam, and then all of a sudden this dart comes out of nowhere and she ends up dying, right? And of course we find out she's a shapeshifter. But what I thought was cool about this is, and this is something that a lot of times I don't really think that we think about, because if you analyze the next few scenes of this, we get a little bit of a murder mystery in this movie. Because now it turns into, well, who killed Zam? You know, where did this mysterious thing come from, right? So Obi-Wan almost has to play detective at this point, which I thought was really cool and fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's like now, okay, this assassin, that's when they realize has to go deeper too, because it's like, all right, the assassin that they caught, now that they're questioning, Django pretty much fears that she might reveal too much, or they may, whether it's voluntary or involuntarily, like through the force or something. So he basically is like, all right, well, I'm gonna just take you out, so that way they can't glean any information out of you. So yeah, it turns into this whole murder mystery. Um, and Anakin, of course, in that moment, once again, showing his impulsiveness, his anger. He's like, "Tell us now!" He's yelling.
Well,
it's like it's like the good cop, bad cop thing.
But he was kind of the good cop, bad cop rolled into one, because at first he's like, who sent you? Tell us. And then all of a sudden, when he's not getting the information, he just turns into this whole other guy. It was like he is good cop and bad cop.
A little schizophrenia.
Right, exactly. It's like, all right, schizo much? No offense, of course, to our schizophrenic friends who might be watching this. Both of you. So Ronaldo says, have we ever seen another shapeshifter? And
oh man. I'm sorry.
I know, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take you out with that
one. Man. All right.
I don't actually, we have, right? Haven't we seen another shapeshifter in Star Wars? I'm sure we have. I mean, maybe not in the film.
Not in the film, but maybe in one of the animations or the animated series.
Yeah, we're probably not the right people to ask that question. I mean, to be honest, it's kind of like, it amazes me how encyclopedic of a knowledge I had about Star Wars, and I still kind of do up to a certain point. But, there's just so much content. I mean, both of us have a stack of Star Wars books that we haven't finished. I've got all these Star Wars comics I'm trying to get through. So, there's a lot. Yeah, so essentially, this turns into this whole murder mystery. And of course, then we get this whole diner, this 50s diner type of thing that Obi-Wan goes into, and he meets his friend Dax, who I actually really like this character. I thought he was cool. I would have liked to have seen more of him, actually.
Yeah, he was a cool character. He had a cool voice, and his sense of humor was cool, but you could tell he's kind of like the bartender who knows, like when people come in and talk at the bar, like he kind of remembers certain things. He's a man who's been around the world a bit. He's well traveled, whether it's himself or just with people he's come in contact with.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's a fascinating thing. Now, of course, I always joke about these people who, they're so hardcore into this and so not have lives that they'll look at some out of focus character in the background and they'll be able to tell you everything about them. I mean, there are people like that. But us not being one of them, sometimes a lot of these background characters become really compelling. And I think that this is one of those guys who's really compelling. Again, I would have liked to have seen, and I really like the vibe. Again, I cannot praise John Williams enough for the music that he puts in these things. There's a lot of really cool, when they do these cool scenes, there's both when those bugs were about to attack Padme and R2 was looking for them, the music was really eerie and really enhanced the scene. And then, of course, in this, when Dex is talking to him, there was that ominous music again, like you felt the weight of that scene. And I just thought that was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things about John Williams is that he always not just the main themes because that's what most people know him for,
Right.
but it's a little incidental music kind of where you're just it kind of takes the background, but if you pay attention to it, it's kind of like all right, like if it was taken away, you'll feel like something's missing.
Well, yeah, that's why. So the two things that I saw when the Detroit Symphony Orchestra performed the music along with the movie, you know, A New Hope and then Empire Strikes Back, it was amazing when you heard all that music. Like, there was stuff that you didn't really pay attention to in the film, but because it was performed live, you really start to appreciate everything that went into that. You know, and I just thought that was so incredible. So we do have this whole murder mystery going. Ronaldo says, "Oh yes, Grand Jedi Master's super powerful Dexter Jetster. Love that guy." Well, you know what? Speaking of that, though, we do have this super powerful Jedi Master, Jocasta Nu. Now, what I thought was really cool was once Dex basically talks about the whole, you know, hey, this is a Camino and Dart, and, you know, it really identifies it. Of course, he goes back
clones.
Yeah. Yep. He goes back to the Jedi archives.
Essentially a big library.
Yeah, essentially it's a big library. And, of course, there's no information on this planet. It doesn't even seem to be there. It's not in any of the charts. And, of course, Jocasta is basically like, well, I mean, if it doesn't exist in the archives, then it doesn't exist. And, again, this is part of that path. This is the foreshadowing of seeing the arrogance of the Jedi, you know, and what I guess, basically, it's the beginning of their downfall.
Yeah, I mean, and what the cool thing is that, you know, what makes Obi-Wan continue to keep pressing on the fact of Camino, right? And if he's like, well, you know, he asks her first about it, but then he looks himself and then he doesn't see, but he realizes that there's something off about it. And the thing that's off about it is you can see their gravitational pull. And so gravity doesn't exist without a planet. So it's kind of like it doesn't exist in blank space.
Right. And she can't, and she's not looking at that. That's really that difference, right? Is that Obi-Wan is still playing detective. He's still
playing detective.
Seeing the clues. Exactly. And it's funny because, you know, I always laughed at her. You know, I mean, I'm just sitting there like, really? But you know, she fought Darth Vader, man. This is a scene from one of the comics, and this is what basically redeemed her in my eyes. Was she had been hiding out or whatever, and she eventually faces Vader, and you're just like, oh, I mean, you actually find out how powerful some of these people are, and that's one of the reasons why I bring this stuff up sometimes, is the fact that what we're limited to seeing in the films doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't more to these characters or more to a particular story just because it's not in the film. Now, Lucas, in some ways, might feel that way, but you never know. I mean, you just really don't know. That was a good comic. So, of course, yeah, like you said, now Yoda, you know, you juxtapose Jocasta's attitude with Yoda. Yoda doesn't possess any of that arrogance or any of that stuff. And what I loved about this was that he used it as a teachable moment. He had a whole class of Jedi younglings, and he said, okay, you know what? I mean, he could have just excused himself, gone and dealt with Obi-Wan in private, but he used it as a teachable moment for all the younglings, and actually had the younglings answer some of the questions, which I thought was a great move.
Yeah, it was, because it was one of those things that's like sometimes we overcomplicate things. And
yes,
that's why he said, truly wonderful the mind of a child is, because, you know, they just look like, well, He said gravity. He's like, gravity silhouette remains, yet there's no planet. How could this be? And it's like, somebody must have erased it or something. I mean, like that
Exactly
was like the
right.
first, like, it's like, well, the
Kid
Padawan is
nails
right,
it like right out the gate.
right out the
Just
gate,
right
yeah.
out. It's like, well, I guess somebody erased it from the archives.
Yeah, and it's like it was such a simple thing, but Obi-Wan was making it more like complex than what it needed to be, and it's just like sometimes you just have to break it down to its nuts and bolts, really.
Well, and that's the thing that I find really hilarious about the whole situation of this film is the fact that really, if they had just followed that through and really, instead of overthinking it and, trying to, because if you think about it, they're behind every step of the way. Palpatine is so far ahead of them in this film. And I mean, really, even in the next one until the very end, and then they finally figure it out, and then it's too late. But if they just allowed themselves to just think like, well, maybe we should start looking where things are a little bit more obvious and maybe not struggle. Because I know that while some of this stuff was going on, Anakin is basically off on his thing with Padme, and we'll get to that. I decided in the way to talk about it, I wanted to really go through a good chunk of Obi-Wan's journey, and then circle back and do Anakin, because they're really both sort of doing the same thing, except Anakin gets sidetracked, and that's a really important thing, because had they both been on the case, I think in a lot of ways, this could have been discovered a little bit earlier. I mean, maybe, maybe not, but you know what I mean? Like, it could have actually... Maybe they wouldn't have discovered the whole Sith plot or anything like that, but I think that they would have been a little bit further ahead.
Possibly. Yeah, I mean...
Very Obi-Wan of you.
Yes. Well, the thing is that this speaks to the arrogance that we later hear Luke Skywalker talk about. And that's like, their whole thing is, well, we're the Jedi. We're the most powerful Force users, out here. So in theory, they're like, well, nothing should be able to slip past. Nothing that devious should be able to slip past us. We would know because we're that powerful. And because, that's why, Palpatine eventually says, like your arrogance blinds you because you're just you think you're so powerful, so smart because you have the Force and you guys, but it's like you can't even see what's happening, that you can't see the obvious things that are happening because you are so arrogant to think that like, oh, this couldn't have happened and gotten past us. How?
No. And that's it. And that's really where I think this particular film does a really good job at driving things home, because again, it was very easy, especially back in 2002, to go, hey, this is the second film of the prequels. Let's compare it to the second film of the original trilogy, right? This is kind of the Empire Strikes Back of this trilogy. Now, it would actually be interesting if we circled back later on and did a show where we compared the two. And in fact, almost do like another series where we say compare Phantom Menace, New Hope, Force Awakens. Attack of the Clones, Empire, Last Jedi. I mean, once we get all the analysis stuff out of the way, it's like, okay, now let's do a comparison. The first film of each trilogy, the second, and so on. Because you really do get certain beats, because Lucas is just so in tune with storytelling and the devices that are used and being influenced by certain timeless storytellers that he often describes it as poetry and rhymes and beats. And every scene, you have to think of it in terms of those things. And you can see the similarities between this film and something like Empire Strikes Back, even though they're telling completely different stories. And whereas the original trilogy is seeing more or less the rebirth of the Republic and the Force and the Jedi, this is actually giving us the fall of all that. So, you know, I mean, I just think that that's interesting. Now, Ronaldo has a good point here, too. He goes, I wonder, do you think you could start watching episode 2 without knowing anything about episode 1? And...
Not completely.
Yeah, I mean, you could, but I think that you would be definitely lost in some areas, without question. Because, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't really know who Padme was. You know, and it's not like there's anything remedial in this film. It's definitely a continuation. I mean, sure, you have the opening crawl. You could probably get away with it, and that's why earlier when we started the show, back when we still had all the graphic issues that I had to face, essentially, this should have been episode 1. I think they should have started this when Anakin was around the age he is in Attack of the Clones. And then, you know, you can go and create an episode 2 that actually would take place during Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. But to actually, the way they stand now, yeah, I agree, man. I don't... I mean, maybe you could, but I don't think it's a good idea. Let's put it like that. All right, so... now we get to the point where Obi-Wan actually lands on Kamino. He meets Tanwi. He meets the main dude. Name escapes me.
Lama Su.
Yes, that's it. He meets Lama Su. So now, this to me was hilarious because you know, they're acting like, yeah, man, okay, cool. You know, you finally showed up. This is good. Let me show you your clones. Let me, you know, and Obi-Wan's like, yeah, well, you know, do you want to see your clone? Sure. I mean, that's why I'm here, right? I mean, he's completely blindsided by this whole thing. But yet he has to pretend like everything's cool, you know?
Yeah, to get the information he needs.
Exactly. And then, of course, we're introduced to the whole Sifo Dyas thing, which, a little bit of trivia, it turns out, I don't remember if this is verified. Anybody watching this can chat in and let me know if this has been verified or not. But it was supposed to be some sort of like anagramish kind of thing of Sidious.
Well, there was an actual Jedi Master named Sifo Dyas.
There was, but that wasn't the original intent. It ended up being like a thing to where they just sort of shoehorn that in or something. I mean, I guess that was like some little bit of trivia that, you know, seemed like it was kind of cool. But this was an important thing too, because again, this is showing us more Jedi history, right? I mean, we're seeing things from a different perspective on that. You know, it's okay, there's this guy named Sifo Dyas. Well, when was he around? Right? Because we start things on the Phantom Menace. So, we don't know what happened before then.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ronaldo says, I think you can, meaning watch Attack of the Clones without Phantom Menace. Maybe some things will go over your head, but overall it's understandable. Yeah, it is understandable. It's just, like I said, you could do it, I just don't think it's a good idea. He also goes on to say, the Kaminoans just felt suspicious to me. And yes, the whole time that I was watching it, because I still remember when I saw this thing for the first time, I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know. And of course, it turned out that they really weren't. That's what I found so hilarious. I mean, they kind of, but not really, you know? And it just seemed... Again, it's that music that they were playing and pretty much just the way the scene moved and felt, you weren't sure. You're kind of like, okay, are they about to spring a trap on Obi-Wan? I mean, what's going on? You know? I mean, that was the part I found really interesting. Ronaldo says, I think the Sifo Dyas stuff is the weakest plot in this. It doesn't get resolved in the film nor in the next one. I mean, it kind of does, because the idea was it was either Palpatine or it was Dooku. One of them was posing as Sifo Dyas. I remember that. I remember there was something along those lines that I think was basically what was the main plot point. But I do understand what Ronaldo's saying, where it's kind of like they don't really go back to that at all. And then, of course, we get to meet the Fets, Boba and Jango. And I really love the way that they handled this whole thing, because the whole scene between Boba Fett, or I'm sorry, not Boba Fett, Jango Fett and Obi-Wan, where, Boba Fett was all like trying to hide the armor by closing the closet door. And there was that sort of like two hunters sizing each other up kind of thing.
Where they were definitely posturing between the two of them.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, they were definitely posturing, and they both was trying to stand their ground while trying to sidestep the one person's questions with their answers and try to gain more information from the other. So, yeah.
Yeah. To me, it was an incredible scene. What an introduction. And, of course, they're bringing in a new Fett, because it was a way of basically being able to see Boba Fett without it being Boba Fett. And introducing the whole idea that the clones were based off of Jango, and just how, I just thought that whole thing was handled really well, and it was a really, really cool plot point. And so Ronaldo has like a bunch of stuff here. The way they act and move is weird. Dooku was the one that was posing as Sifo Dyas. That makes sense. For a casual viewer, the whole thing could be confusing. Again, if you're a casual viewer. But if you're a hardcore viewer, you're going to watch all these things. And then he says, Jango never seemed like a bad guy to me, just someone who was doing his job. Well, he even said, hey, I'm just a simple man trying to make my way through the universe, right? So you do get this sense, and we kind of leave things there. If we go back now to the actual Anakin story, of course, Anakin was sent off while Obi-Wan was investigating this whole, where did this Camino and Dart come from and everything else. Anakin was then charged with, protect Padme. And what's the best place to do? Let Padme go back to her home. So that's what they do. They go back to Naboo, which was interesting. And it was kind of cool, I think, to see Naboo in a slightly different light. But this is basically, again, the beginning of the furthering of Anakin's resentment. And the fact that, when he tries to give his advice on how they should handle security, she's just like, he's just a Padawan.
She basically called him a kid.
And that was basically the thing through the whole beginning of this thing. Again, if I actually had, photos or whatever for every little major thing in this whole story, we would definitely be here for like 6 hours, because there's a lot really that happens with the whole Anakin and Padme thing, which some of the stuff I thought was kind of nauseating, like the dialogue was really, really bad between some of the stuff, but some of the stuff I thought was kind of cool. Like in this scene, I thought that one of the really cool things that was a good takeaway was the fact that this is where you start to see the idealistic, or the differences,
the ideologies,
ideological differences, thank you, between Padme and Anakin, right? Where she's still pretty much the Republic, everybody should vote, more of a democratic process. He frames it as a joke, but it's a little bit of a true said in jest. It's like, if one person could just, and if they can't agree, then somebody should make them. And, then of course it's... But I think that ultimately, the whole point of that scene, and this is, of course, after they're running on those stupid, whatever, space buffalo. I don't even know what those are.
Yeah.
you do get a little bit of that whole Nicholas Sparks thing going in these scenes. It's a little bit of that young romance kind of a thing. But again, ultimately, I think that you had to almost rush this in a way if you wanted to get to where they were going to be by the third act of the film. And as nauseating as some of the scenes might have been, I personally, I'd be curious on what you think on this, but I don't think that they actually did a really bad job with the pacing on that. I just think a lot of the dialogue was not great.
Yeah, I would agree. You kind of have to show the love there, and it's going to be because it's for kids, so it's kind of cheesy, but it's not. It's not more like adultish like Han and Leia. That was more
right.
Like if you did a compare, but then again, those characters are a little bit older.
True. And of course, I'm sure that's something we'll bring up on our comparison, show. But then, of course, we do get a little bit more adult, because Padme dons her little dominatrix outfit, and the lighting's a little bit darker, and the music's a little creepier, and then he just utters that horrible dialogue of, I can't even repeat it because it's just so bad.
You know what? I should. The day I decide I want to get married to someone, I probably should use his dialogue just to see if it will work. See what her reaction would be.
Well, I'll tell you this. If somebody was really trying to, marry you off or whatever, right? And you wanted to basically go, all right. Of course, it would probably backfire on you, right? She would.
Of course, it'd be my luck.
Yeah, your luck, be like, yes, I feel the same way or whatever. But this was really, it was just painful to me to watch this.
It's kind of like that Twilight moment, the movie Twilight, where it's just that teeny love.
I know. And that's the thing. But even Twilight was not quite as cringy as. The worst thing about Twilight, at least the first one, was that all the dialogue. I thought the dialogue in the Phantom Menace and all that was wooden. I was seriously, comically wooden. Now Ronaldo weighs in. He says, "I love that outfit. I have dreams where I see it." Yeah, we all do.
We don't need.
We all do. But you know what?
We'll see Eric's dreams a little bit later.
Yes. I was going to say, mine, we're coming up on that. But, oh, wait. Oh, this is actually a fascinating thing. So Ronaldo says, I actually know someone who used that dialogue with the girl. It went bad, as it should. Because honestly...
Oh, man, that's hilarious.
If that worked on anybody, I can't even imagine the type of woman that kind of dialogue would work with. I'm sorry. But moving on, one of the cool things I thought about Attack of the Clones 2 was how it brought back certain characters, right? And when Anakin actually met Watto again. Now, keep in mind, even though Anakin and Shmi, Anakin's mother, were Watto's slaves, he actually treated them pretty good and treated them pretty fairly. So I didn't exactly expect any real animosity or anything, but it was kind of cool, though, to see Watto interacting with Anakin when Anakin's now like a Jedi, right? It would have been cooler maybe in episode 3, but...
Yeah, just to see Watto, now... He's like, man, man, you sure have sprouted and a Jedi. And then, now Watto's like, hey, you're a Jedi.
I know.
Man.
That was
ready
to me.
Farm him out.
That was the funniest thing in the world to me. Is like, hey, listen, I got this list of people that, owe me money or whatever. Maybe you can help me out with them. I thought that was just such a Watto thing. But again.
But then he could see the darkness in the growth of Anakin. He was like, my mother, he's like, oh yeah, Shmi, yeah, all right. Anakin's on a mission at this point. Look, I almost wanted him to say you can dispense with the pleasantries. Almost, it's just
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, it would have been kind of funny and kind of cool, but on the other hand, we would have been cringing like, all right, dude, that's just,
yeah, too on the nose.
too on the nose. But I think that one of the things that was really cool was the fact that, again, we're brought back to Tatooine because this is, we're back at Tatooine now. We're brought back there predominantly because Anakin starts having dreams again. I mean, this is a recurring theme. He never really got over the fact that he wasn't able to save his mother yet, right? Because that was one of the first things he said. I'm going to become a Jedi, and then we're going to come back and free you. And at first, of course, he wanted Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to do it. But then eventually that was sort of always his goal. And that's something I'm sure he was constantly telling Palpatine. And there's been theories out there that Palpatine is the one that actually was putting a lot of these dreams in Anakin's head. Now, I don't know if they were fleshed out yet or not. Like, I'm not sure that's an official thing or not.
I think that would be kind of cheesy, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I don't necessarily think it would be beyond the realm of possibility, but I agree it would be a little cheesy. Just a little too convenient. But this is when we finally meet the Lars family.
Mm-hmm.
I almost sound like I'm introducing the Family Feud when I say that. Introducing the Lars family. But this is kind of cool, too, because I thought Klieg Lars was actually a pretty cool character. Obviously, we see Owen, and then Beru is his girlfriend at this point. It was just, it was nice to actually see that interaction between Anakin and them, because you have to figure out why does Owen have these really strong feelings about mentioning Anakin and dealing with that with Luke, and you had to go back and circle back to that.
Yeah. Yeah, they were a really cool family. I mean, you could tell Klieg, he talks about like, look, I tried to, he even lost his leg trying to look for her, what I mean? Like,
oh man, the novelization, by the way, if you haven't read the novel versions, the book versions of these films, highly recommend it. Phantom Menace, but especially Attack of the Clones and even Revenge of the Sith. The novelizations were so much better than the movies. And they go into the whole Klieg Lars thing, how he was trying to find Shmi, how he lost his leg and all that stuff. I mean, action-packed stuff. Action-packed stuff. So then, of course, he does eventually go out. He finds Shmi. He finds Shmi, like, pretty much, like, right when she's at the end. It's almost like if you had just gotten there maybe, like, a few hours earlier.
Minutes. Yeah.
Or maybe a day or so, it's like maybe he could have helped her or whatever. I guess the whole idea was that she was holding out to be reunited with him one last time, but this isn't like one of those I'm dying of a broken heart here thing. I mean, she was kind of brutalized by the Sand People, I thought.
Yeah.
And I mean, it just, I don't know. I mean, overall, were you satisfied with this scene, with the way that it played out?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, it gave Anakin purpose. Once again, it showed the motivation that he needed to pursue down the dark path. Is a very pivotal moment. It's like, okay, what, I mean, 9 times out of 10, what son doesn't love his mother?
It's true.
And it's, and it's, you always, as a son, you always want to protect your mother and be there for her. And, so for him to be in that moment where, like you said, had he been there a day ago or found her earlier, he might have been able to save her, got her some medical attention, kept her around a little bit longer. But, her injuries, I believe, were too substantial. And I think, just the Force was kind of holding her together until Anakin got to her.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely. And again, it was tragic, and it's something that I think is part of the reason why, Anakin became who he is. Ronaldo says, this is the best scene in the movie by far, and it's way more emotional than Padme's death. You wish it were longer.
Definitely.
And absolutely. this is really a good example of what it should be. It wasn't too silly. It was, and again, it went back to that darkness, kind of like the first scene. You know, everybody, as much as Attack of the Clones is a fun adventure Saturday matinee type movie, it does have a certain darkness to it. Like when Anakin essentially succumbs to the dark side, and it's like, all right, these sand people basically killed my mother. They're all gonna die.
Yep.
And now
it's a clearance sale. Everything must go.
Exactly. And one of the things that, now see, this is what's so funny about the way that Star Wars is really, or I should say the Star Wars franchise is being handled by Lucasfilm. Because now we kind of like sand people thanks to the Book of Boba Fett. You know, we understand them a little bit more. Back then, all we seen of them was when the one attacked Luke, and then, of course, when they were trying to peg off all the pod racers and how brutal they were. And then, of course, what they did to Shmi. So when Anakin goes psycho on him, it's like, all right, now it's on, and now you've met your match. You're not going to be able to take this guy out. And he did. And, of course, one of the other scenes that I thought was really cool is that when he's going to Padme and he feels bad. Like, he does this. He succumbs to the anger, but he really legitimately feels bad about it. And, you know, he's remorseful. I guess that's the best way to put it.
One of my favorite parts about this whole that whole scene with Anakin talking to Shmi, and you know, then when he goes ballistic, is the music. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
like
yes.
The touching music that you have between, she's touching Anakin's face and she's just like, you know, you've grown, and you know, and he's like, I'm here to save you, Mom. And he has that, you know, that hope in his voice. And then, you know, to see that vanquish right in front of him, and it's just like, you hear that dun, 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 and then it sprightly kind of picks up, but it's eerie, and, you know, and then next, you know, you see him come out with a blade, and he's just like, yep, and he's just hacking people.
Oh yeah. And then when he's talking about it to Padme, you know, it's like not just the men, the women, the children. I mean, he was just
slaughtered them like animals.
Like animals. Yeah. I mean, that was just I mean, that was just that was fantastic.
His whole I hate them.
Yep.
And even how they snuck in the whole Imperial March.
Yes. That was so cool.
A little bit. Oh my God. Like that.
I mean, it was, and
that
again,
was gold.
That was gold. And that's the kind of writing and everything. And again, I mean, as much as the prequels get blasted, no pun intended, a lot of times, I mean, there was some really, really cool moments in them. Really great moments of writing, really great execution. I mean, you know, of course, as a whole, we always say, yeah, poor writing, poor execution, poor direction. You had these actors, you wasted them. I mean, look, this applies through all the movies in the prequel trilogy. Maybe a little less so with Revenge of the Sith, but it's still there, you know? So now Ronaldo says, it's an example that Lucas is very good at making emotion without dialogue. Yes. So he needs to do silent films. This scene would have been worse if it had more dialogue. And I agree. I think he's right about that. He says, I actually feel a bit sad in this because of the Book of Boba Fett. Yeah, I mean, it's funny how watching content that's made now makes you look at past projects a little differently, which means they're doing a good job of tying all the content together. And he finishes, not gonna lie, the dialogue is funny to me. And, you know, it hits everybody in a different way, I think. I mean, it just depends on what you're feeling, because I know that I've looked at some of these scenes differently depending on the mood I was in when I watched them and how old I was. Because, you know, this movie came out like 21 years ago now. So, of course, one of the cool things I thought, too, was that now, you know, Anakin wants to go help Obi-Wan, but he's doing the right thing this time. You know, he's saying, like, look, no, the council told me to stay here. They told me to wait here. That's what I'm going to do. And now it's Padme that's basically like, well, well, I'm going to go save him, and if you want to protect me, you're going to have to go with me kind of thing. So I thought that was kind of a cool twist. And so now we get, of course, the big droid factory scene, which I know that this got a lot of criticism when it came out. The only time that it really started bugging me was the terrible humor with C-3PO. Just one-liner. I mean, I have to admit, so here's where I stand on this, because I remember feeling this way even when I saw the film for the first time I'm talking about. I like the fact that 3PO got mixed up in it. I like the fact that, his head was on a battle, or, like a battle droid's body, and the battle droid's head was on his body, and there was a little bit of that mix up. I thought that was cool. I thought that was hilarious. But just some of the one-liners that he was coming out with,
Well, shut me down. Machines making machines.
Well, it's just like, what were some of them it was just...
Oh, something about his head. I forgot.
Yeah, well, there was the one where, I'm beside myself or whatever. But that was kind of like later on the actual battle. And that was, was kind of funny. But there was just like a lot of stuff during the droid factory part of it where I really I enjoyed the action that, when Padme and Anakin were kind of caught up in the machines and stuff, and she was almost, hit with the whatever molten metal or whatever it was. And it was funny because when Anakin first got that like stamping thing on his hand, and at first I was like, oh, is that how he's going to get, his mechanical hand or something? But turned out not to be the case. But that I thought was actually cool. And then, of course, going back to the Obi-Wan, their stories are basically converging at this point, right? Because they're on Geonosis. Anakin and Padme are trying to save them, but they're kind of caught up in the adventures of the droid factory. They eventually get caught. And then, of course, we look at Obi-Wan, and now he's caught, and this is where we meet Dooku. And Dooku, right from the beginning, became one of my favorite characters. You had this... He was a former Jedi, which really we hadn't seen too many of that. The fallen Jedi turning into a Sith thing, and he had this regal sort of, majestic, gentlemanly, air to him. Which I thought was a really, really cool thing. I thought that was something that was a very interesting way to make one of these characters. I thought that was just really cool.
And the fact that he's a Sith Lord without looking crazy. Like, he didn't need a helmet. He didn't have a ghastly face. Like, he was like a regular guy,
It's kind of normal. Yep. Just, a little dressed up, still does the cape thing.
Didn't have the tattoo face, horns, and, he was just...
That's a good point, actually. Because, and honestly, that's something that did strike me at first. I'm like, wow, he kind of looks like, my grandpa. He doesn't look weird. Like you said, doesn't have a weird helmet, doesn't have, all that stuff. And that's actually a pretty cool thing. Plus, he was Qui-Gon's, master. He was Yoda's apprentice. We find out a lot about him that's really kind of cool. And then, I love the whole, like, rescue thing. One of my favorite lines in the whole thing is like, well, we're actually here to rescue you. And he's like, good job.
Yeah, the fact that he looked at his chains and said it, that was priceless. I loved Obi-Wan for that. He's like, then we came to rescue you. And then he looked up and was like, oh, good job.
Good job. Yeah. See, that's the kind of natural humor that I love when they do that kind of a thing. They're setting up a really big action scene. A lot of this stuff. But again, this is where Lucas knew when to kind of bring it down a little bit and basically have a natural humorous dialogue thing. It was great. And then Ronaldo says, this is a part that really, really, really feels like a video game, literally. Yeah, like the whole droid factory scene especially. And he says, scene's the second best. Christopher Lee is having a blast in this, and Obi-Wan is such a troll. Yeah, I mean, you could tell that Christopher Lee was just totally enjoying his experience, as Count Dooku. I mean, you just knew it. And then, of course, right before that scene, though, we get the really bad dialogue now from Natalie Portman's side, right? First, we got Anakin and his whole thing, and then we got this whole, I really deeply, madly, whatever it is. It's just like, okay, somebody needs to put a bullet in my head at this moment. Here's the bad thing about it, okay? The actual scene itself, I thought was cool, right? And the fact that one of the things that I loved is when she's confessing the love, and you could tell Anakin was like, well, wait a second. Now, hold on. I thought that we agreed. What are you talking about? We agreed that this was not a good idea.
Right.
I love that. I love the way that Hayden Christensen played that, because he perfectly embodied, this is probably what Anakin, like, wait, what are you talking about? Where's this coming from?
Right.
Ronaldo says it's so bad it's funny.
Mind.
Yeah, exactly. But that was the beginning. And again, they had to, if you're going to do this, you had to get them like full blown in love with each other by Act 3 in order to set up the rest of the film. So, that did have to happen. And then, of course, you had the first part of this battle, which this is the first time we actually see a lot of Jedi in a battle scene. And this was one of the coolest, and this is one of the things that we were waiting for.
Yeah, like when they all kind of ignited the blades and they were all like all over the arena, it was just like, all right.
And especially when, Django was about to do some and you saw that purple blade just ignite right across his neck, and you're like, whoa. And it was Mace. I mean, you saw Mace like kind of sneaking up on him. I mean, and again, this is where we see Mace for the first time actually engaging in a battle, which I just thought was incredible.
Yes, kudos to Sam Jackson. He played the heck out of Mace too. That very stern, stoic, kind of guy. But he's cool, calm, and collected. But he's no nonsense,
Absolutely, yeah. Of course.
Yes, we can see.
There's actually, so if you look at like the helmet down there, there's a meme that somebody shared where you see a head dropping out of it or something like that. Because I mean, essentially, it's it's his head's in there. So, but yeah, this is where what I would call the birth of Boba Fett as we know him. Right, this is the first thing that happens where he's going to be on that thing. And of course, they continued that in the Clone Wars. They had like 2 or 3 episodes where he was trying to get revenge on Mace Windu for this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when Mace lopped his head off, man, I mean, not only did he just like cut, I mean, he Barry Bonds that thing, man. I mean, he
did, but
I mean, he took it clean off, and then it was just like rolling. And
but they had
it was
kind
of
a
grisly thing, though.
It was, I admit it, but I mean, it was like, look, Django kept engaging him. I mean, it's kind of like, well, what do you want him to do? I mean, it just, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes I think, I get that Boba was kind of emotional about the whole thing, but it's like, dude, really? I mean, what do you think he's going to do? I mean, come on now. This is Star Wars.
Gun, die by the gun.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're trying to shoot him with a flamethrower. You're doing all this. I mean, hello, he's going to defend himself. Granted, he probably could have maybe taken a leg or maybe just cut something else. Maybe he didn't have to lop the entire head off. I will grant you that, but that's what happens.
Yes, it's war.
And so now we come to the first cool duel, right? Because we had a couple of really cool lightsaber duels in this. Now, after the last movie, we had the Phantom Menace lightsaber duel of Darth Maul versus Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn. Here we get Dooku versus Anakin and Obi-Wan. And, in this one, of course, Anakin decides to be that guy and just immediately run after
Impulsive.
Dooku. Yep. And he gets the whole Sith lightning.
Yep. He gets a shocking surprise.
Shocking surprise.
Yeah,
And
and that's the thing with this, this is age versus, or wisdom versus zeal, right? Anakin has all the zeal in the world, but Obi-Wan holds the wisdom. He knows, number one, who Dooku is.
Yep.
He knows that's like, okay, you trained my master, and your master was Master Yoda. So I know you're powerful because just simply of your lineage, right? And then, Dooku was always regarded as one of the best swordsmen, in the Jedi Order. So yeah, Obi-Wan isn't so like, gung-ho about running into it. But Anakin, because he's full of this bravado, this gusto, he's in the moment, he just got out this battle, and now he's like, okay, I got somebody with a lightsaber. Oh yeah. And he's probably looking at like you're some old dude. Yeah, dude.
That's
I'm
probably
gonna
exactly
walk
what he
the
was
floor
thinking.
with you.
Exactly. It's like,
It's
oh
like,
man. It's like, all right.
boy,
And he probably, yeah, exactly. Had youth on his
got
side, knew he
spanked.
was powerful. Yep. And one of the things that was cool about this too, this is the first time that we find out. I mean, number one, besides somebody else except other than Palpatine has Force lightning, we see somebody actually deflected with the lightsaber. It was so
Yeah,
cool
Obi-Wan did
when,
that.
when Obi-Wan absorbed it with his lightsaber. Because that kind of made you go, all right, Obi-Wan, guy's kind of cool. Just saying.
Absolutely.
But of course, both of them just, lose spectacularly to the point to where, I mean, Anakin actually got his arm, and I think did he get his leg hacked? No, he just got his arm cut off.
His arm.
Yeah, I'm thinking the next movie. That's when Obi-Wan kind of finishes the job, right? But this one, he just gets his arm cut off. Obi-Wan gets a couple of, cuts on his arm and leg. So they're completely incapacitated. So, of course, Yoda has to pop up. And this, of course, there was a couple of things that we all thought in the prequel trilogy. The first one was this one. What would Yoda look like dueling somebody? I mean, has he ever used... you can never imagine this guy using a lightsaber.
At all. Well, see, first of all, for me, I didn't know this was going to happen. For me, because I think you read the book.
I read the book, but then
too.
there was a lot of information that came out. I mean, it wasn't quite like it is now, but the internet was getting up there,
For me, yeah, walking into the theater and it's like, okay, and you hear the tap of Yoda's cane as he walks in.
I know,
and then you're like, okay, because first of all, Yoda's like, all right, put me on a ship, and I'm just thinking he's gonna help help those guys out. Like, I'm gonna just be your rescue. Like, come on, hop on the ship and get out of there. I had no idea that Yoda was about to step off this thing and get down to business. And so when you see Yoda, he's like Master Yoda, and it's like, okay. Then they start having this whole duel thing, and you're just like, I'm already blown away. Like, whoa. Like Yoda with a lightsaber. And he doesn't just take the lightsaber off. No, he uses the force. It flips into his little hand. And he just starts
completely showing off. Yep.
Yeah, it's just like, all right, let me show you some Padawan, and they go after it.
And then he's just like a little popcorn or something, man. Just like
he's flipping like a pinball. Around. He's just yeah.
That was crazy.
Absolutely bananas. And I was just like, okay. And I could see how that he's using his height, which is most people would think is a disadvantage, to his advantage. So I thought that was really sweet. But then after that, it was like, okay, they did both. And you and I had this conversation, Eric, that, when you get so powerful, you really don't need a lightsaber, honestly, because you have the force behind you. So it's like, well, obviously we're not going to win this with lightsabers. He's like, but let's just see of our knowledge of the Force. Let's see. And Dooku was kind of feeling himself because one, yes, he was trained by Yoda, and Yoda's his master, so he knows how powerful Yoda is. But he's also been trained on the dark side of things, and the dark side kind of amplifies some stuff sometimes. So he thought, and so he figured like, okay, well, what I got going on now, I'm more powerful than you.
Exactly.
And so he starts trying
one
to
of the
do
things
that
that I
lightning
thought
thing.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, he tries to do the lightning thing with Yoda. First, Yoda deflects it, and with his hand, mind you. And so we had never seen anything like that before.
Nope.
I was already impressed by the lightsaber thing, but then he did it with his bare hand. I'm like, oh, that's sweet. And I remember but then
that's what showed you how powerful Yoda was. You're like, dude, this guy can block Force lightning. All right.
Yeah, but then he tries it again, and this time Yoda absorbs it.
I know.
My theater, I don't know about you, but my theater went nuts.
Oh yeah,
everybody was just like screaming and throwing popcorn and Sour Patch Kids all over the place. I mean, it was pandemonium in it because none of us expected to see anything like that.
No, and I mean, again, even though I knew that they were gonna do, I didn't know any of that stuff, right? I mean, those are the kind of things that were cool because, like you said, Dooku definitely thought, okay, I was really high up in the Jedi Order, so I'm really powerful on the light side. Plus, now I have all this dark side knowledge. So I mean, technically, he has.
You would think you
right?
The best of both worlds,
exactly. But then again, of course, we find out later though that, and I don't even think it was even in the films. I think this is like not really an expanded universe, but like a new canon thing where Yoda may not have used the dark side, but he knew it though. And that's obvious because obviously he knew how to counterattack, right? Like when they leashed the dark side attacks on him, he had defenses for that. So let's see. Ronaldo, he's basically, when he was talking about the Anakin, this fight is fun, but when Anakin and Dooku are fighting in the dark, it's not the best. Yeah, that they obviously did to cover up the fact that Christopher Lee at the time was like 80-some years old, and the idea was, because he used to be in a lot of those swashbuckler movies, he actually knew fencing. He knew how to sword fight. In fact, they made Dooku's lightsaber hilt kind of in the model of a sword that Christopher Lee used to use all the time. I thought was kind of a cool bit of trivia. But because of his age, he still maintained all the handwork. He could still do all that. He just couldn't do the footwork. So they used CGI, obviously, in Revenge of the Sith. But here, they just had to get around that somehow. So they just, okay, we're going to turn out the lights and see the flashes. And I agree. I mean, it was a little disappointing for that reason, but I was still into it, and the story part was cool. And then, of course, Ronaldo says, Yoda fighting is very cool. I loved it. Yeah, we all did. It was just phenomenal. Then, of course, we got the big battle. Now, this is where, the clones are landing. They save because it looked pretty grim for the Jedi. I remember thinking in the theater, right, like, wow, how are they going to get out of this? They're completely surrounded by battle droids and, the droidekas and all the other stuff. And you're just kind of going, I wonder how they're going to get out of this one. And then, of course, Yoda comes with all the clones. And then it just becomes pandemonium, right? Now this whole big battle starts to ensue. And this was pretty epic, I have to say.
Yeah, seeing the clone troopers, and you see the difference why they wanted clones over droids because they can run, they can jump on. I mean, there was that one scene where this one clone trooper runs and jumps on top of this.
Oh, I know.
Droid thing, and he just starts shooting down on it.
Yeah,
man, it was like total Call of Duty on this one. It was just like Ronaldo said, total video game vibes on this one.
Well, and the thing about it is, because this remains one of my favorite battles in the franchise, actually, because one, it was spectacular. It was big. It was spectacular, like you said. It showed, because up until now, at least in the prequels, right, all we knew was battle droids. Like, that was the big army. Now you got these guys that are superior, and, you have all these new vehicles and weapons and all this stuff, and Yoda's like, leading the charge, and now the Jedi are becoming kind of generals. But then the other thing I liked about it was the pacing. It wasn't too slow, it wasn't too fast. And of course this is going on because this is actually what led to the lightsaber battles. So yeah, it was just phenomenal. And then of course it goes in and we get this whole secret wedding thing. So Padme and Anakin are moving pretty fast here. They were kind of getting reacquainted at the beginning of the film, middle of the film, a little bit of, kind of like, I kind of like her. Oh, she kind of likes him, that sort of thing. Then they profess their love in very nauseating ways, and now they're getting married. Mechanical hand and all. Yeah, I thought it was funny, when she goes to hold his mechanical hand. I'm like, you sure you want to do that? He hasn't had a lot of practice. What if he accidentally squeezes too tight or something? Those are just the things I think of, people. I'm sorry. But
yeah, he's got his his best buds R2 and 3PO there as witnesses to the. I thought that was hilarious.
Oh, that was, and it was actually kind of cool because again, we pointed this out. The original trilogy is told through their eyes, and this is another example of how one or both of them have actually been present for every major moment in this franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, 3PO gets his memory wiped, but we'll talk about that one next week. Yes.
Yes.
So Ronaldo kind of like the dominatrix outfit. I was always partial to this one, I don't know. Just kind of thought it was cool.
That's Eric's screensaver on his phone and his laptop, and
it should be. The white pants, we made a bunch of jokes about it in the past, and now that we're talking about the movie that actually features them, I had to dedicate a slide to the white outfit. It was quite
she totally looks like Tomb Raider, like in this.
It does. I mean, aside from the sexiness of it and all, I really thought I'd really like Padme's. I mean, she had a little bit of an action scene in The Phantom Menace, but I really liked her growth, I guess, is like from just senator, queen, or whatever, to like kind of like a soldier, right? I mean, like you said, she does become almost like a Lara Croft character, but it was believable. It didn't feel weird, right? Like you can see that, and of course you got to remember she's Leia's mom, right? So I mean, Leia's getting these traits from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I thought that was cool. And, when she was fighting alongside of him, Ronaldo says, I'm having dark side thoughts watching this. I agree.
Put your lightsaber away.
Yeah, put the lightsaber down. And then, of course, finally, one thing I will say about the prequels, they always have these really cool ending scenes. This whole scene where they start showing the entire... Sweet. I mean... This is just so cool. And honestly, you get the vibe of, oh, this is kind of how the Empire is created. Now you understand where all this stuff comes from. And of course, the clone armor, which is kind of funny because they only recently created real on-screen clone armor. I forgot what show it was for. But it was like the first time because none of the clones in any of these films were actual actors. None of them. They were all CGI, which was... You sometimes forget that, honestly. So yeah, that was really cool. But yeah.
That is Attack of the Clones,
that is Attack of the Clones. And, so now it's that time where we give our ratings. So I'll let you go first this time since I've gone first the last couple of times.
I would say I would give Attack of the Clones.
See, it's an easy mistake to make.
I'll give it a 7, a solid 7.
That's exactly what I'm going to do. That's where I was headed to. I was thinking about giving it a 6 because I'm trying to keep the top stuff for the original trilogy. But to be honest, I have to say, after watching it again for this show last weekend, it really was a fun, well-paced, solid movie. You know, I mean, there were issues, as there are with all the prequel movies, but I have to say that it was cool, you know? Ronaldo, I'm going to get this up on I'm not just going to, like, read it, I'm going to actually put it up. Ronaldo gives it a 7.5 out of 10. So he's going just a little bit, which, hey, Ronaldo, congratulations for giving us a nice round number, right? No, I think I'm going to give it a 7.65, you know? I mean, 7.5, that's good, man. That's progress. We're doing halves and wholes. That's cool.
There's no quarter notes.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, again, you know, I mean, I think it was great, but again, what do you guys think? That's really the important thing. So let us know in the comment section. If you haven't already liked the video, like this video, subscribe if you want to see more. This Friday, of course, we're going to be reviewing, what episode are we on? Like 6 or
7?
Is it 7? Man, oh, that's right. Yeah, you're right. It is.
Mm-hmm.
So episode 7 of the Bad Batch. So if you guys have missed any of our Bad Batch review episodes, you're going to want to go back and check those out. And of course, you know, we're on Attack of the Clones. We just wrapped up that review. We did the Phantom Menace last time. We've done the original trilogy. We went through everything Star Wars was. So you're going to want to check that series out. And then, of course, after that, you're going to want to be right back here, 8 o'clock on Monday, next Monday, when we do Revenge of the Sith. We're going to be wrapping up the prequel trilogy. You know, work willing. But we'll let you guys know if for some reason we can't do this whole thing live. So hopefully we'll see you guys Friday at 8 o'clock. With that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.